The office buzzed with the hum of conversations and the steady tap of keyboards. It was just another Monday morning, the kind where everyone was slowly coming back to life after a weekend filled with too little sleep and too much coffee. Among the sea of faces, there was Sarah. Blonde, sharp-eyed, always dressed to the nines. She had the look of someone who could charm her way out of anything. But behind that polished appearance, something darker was simmering. Sarah had been working tirelessly, eager to climb the corporate ladder. But lately, something felt off. Then there was Jordan, a calm, focused guy in his early 30s. He had a warm smile that seemed to put everyone at ease. He was talented, no doubt. But unlike Sarah, he didn't wear the airs of someone climbing the ladder. He was humble, just doing his job, keeping his head down and getting results. And that was exactly why, just last week, he had gotten the promotion Sarah had been gunning for. She told herself it should have been hers. She'd sacrificed weekends, worked late nights, and played the office game to perfection. But instead, it was Jordan who was handed the reins to lead the new project. The jealousy inside Sarah started to bubble. She told herself she deserved it more. He wasn't even trying. He didn't care about this job the way she did. And slowly that resentment took root. She wasn't going to let him get away with this, not without consequences. As the days passed after Jordan's promotion, Sarah found herself growing more and more frustrated. Every time she saw him walk into the office with his calm demeanor and easy smile, something inside her twisted. She should have been the one standing at the front of the boardroom, confidently presenting ideas. She had the experience, the drive, and the work ethic, but somehow it was Jordan, a black man who didn't even try as hard as she did, who got the recognition. The frustration gnawed at her, slowly turning into something darker. Each time Jordan spoke in meetings, Sarah felt her jaw tighten. His words, simple yet powerful, captured everyone's attention. Jordan's got great leadership potential, they'd say, and every time Sarah had to bite her lip, swallowing down the bitterness threatening to spill out. It wasn't just the promotion. It was the feeling of being overlooked, of being ignored. In Sarah's eyes, it wasn't fair. Her hard work, those late nights, the extra hours, none of it mattered. Her colleagues and bosses seemed to prefer Jordan's easygoing nature, the way he got along with everyone. It made Sarah feel small. She was the one pushing to succeed, but Jordan, he was effortlessly winning people over. And deep down, Sarah knew there was more to it than just the promotion. Growing up, she had been surrounded by subtle, quiet racism. Her parents didn't explicitly teach her to hate black people, but they made sure she knew people like Jordan were somehow less. Those thoughts had lingered, quietly embedded in the way she saw the world, even when she tried to push them away. Every glance at Jordan made her feel something she couldn't shake, envy, mixed with bitterness, something she hadn't fully recognized until now. Her insecurity had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just about Jordan being promoted over her. It was that he didn't deserve it. The whispers in her mind got louder. He doesn't work as hard as you. He doesn't care about this job the way you do. And yet he gets everything. The more she thought about it, the more Sarah was convinced this wasn't just about work. It was about proving a point, that she was more capable, more deserving. And that thought, burning with resentment, began to form into something darker. Sarah could make them all see who Jordan really was. She could destroy the image they had of him, tear him down. After all, wasn't he just a lucky guy who knew how to pretend? What if she exposed the truth? What if she took matters into her own hands? Maybe, just maybe, she could take back what she thought was rightfully hers. One morning, she woke up with a sudden clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. The idea had been simmering in the back of her mind, like a dangerous thought that refused to leave. Today, she decided, would be the day. She'd make Jordan pay for what he'd done, taking the promotion she felt she deserved. He'd be exposed as the fraud she believed him to be. No one would look at him the same way again. And as for her, well, she would finally take back what was hers. Sarah spent the entire morning pacing around her apartment, rehearsing her lines, practicing her tone. She couldn't afford any slip-ups. Everything had to be perfect. The timing, the way she would cry, the way she would scream. It had to be believable, beyond a shadow of a doubt. She imagined the scene in her head, her colleagues' shocked faces, the whispers of disbelief. She could already feel the rush of triumph, the power of making them believe her, making them see what she had planned. Her plan was simple: accuse Jordan of something unspeakable, something that would shatter his career and his reputation forever. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. It didn't matter that he hadn't done anything. The only thing that mattered was that people would believe her, and she would make sure they did. The office would be full by mid-morning. The chaos, the confusion, it would all be perfectly timed. She spent an hour in front of the mirror, getting ready. Nothing too fancy, just enough to appear as if something had gone terribly wrong. She chose a blouse that would be easy to tear and a skirt that would make her look as if she'd been physically restrained. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the clothes, but she ignored it. There was no room for hesitation. As she stood in her office, looking at her reflection, a strange mix of excitement and dread bubbled inside her. This was it. She was ready. When the time came, Sarah walked into Jordan's office at a deliberate pace, almost casual. The office was quiet. Jordan was typing away at his desk, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. She closed the door behind her, the latch clicking, and the sound echoed in her ears. The room felt smaller now, almost suffocating. This was the moment that would change everything. Her heart raced in her chest, but her mind was clear. There was no turning back, no second guessing. She began tearing at her blouse. The fabric ripped easily, and she made sure to make enough noise to grab the attention of anyone passing by. Then she screamed, loud, frantic, making her whole body shake with the terror she was pretending to feel. The sound echoed off the walls, and she heard footsteps just outside the door. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she pictured Jordan's confusion, his fear. She could see it all, the shock on his face. But even as Sarah screamed, a dark, nagging feeling crept into the back of her mind. What if it didn't work? What if no one believed her? Her heart raced even faster now. The fear wasn't about what Jordan would do. It was about her plan falling apart. She couldn't let that happen. She had to follow through. She had to win. The footsteps outside the door grew louder. Sarah's hands trembled with anticipation, her breath quickening. This was it, the moment. There was no turning back now. She had to keep it together. She had to make them believe her. As the door flung open and the first faces rushed in, Sarah took a shaky breath. She could almost hear the whispers starting. What had happened? Who was to blame? The weight of the moment pressed down on her, but she forced it away. She was doing the right thing, she told herself. The consequences, she couldn't think about those. This wasn't just about a promotion anymore. This was about control. This was about showing everyone that she was the one who deserved to be at the top. And then, as the first faces peered into the office, Sarah realized she had crossed a line. But it was too late. The plan was already in motion. There was no going back. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. This was it, the moment that would change everything. She glanced at Jordan, sitting at his desk, typing away. He hadn't noticed her yet. She took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline rush through her veins. She could already hear her own thoughts. This would work. It had to. With a single, swift motion, she yanked at the fabric of her blouse, tearing it forcefully. The sound of fabric ripping cut through the quiet of the room, and for a moment, Sarah felt a sick satisfaction. She could almost hear her colleagues outside, wondering what was going on. Their curiosity piqued. But that wasn't enough. She needed more. With a quick look toward the door to make sure no one was already in, Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream, the kind that would send shockwaves down the hallways, mixing terror and agony in her voice. Her body shook, trembling with the false fear she was carefully projecting. Her chest heaved with each breath. She made sure to scream Jordan's name, her voice desperate, laced with pleading. I didn't want this," she cried out. "Please, no." The sound of her voice, frantic and broken, was meant to carry, meant to be heard by anyone in range. She needed them to believe her. Every tear, every burst of emotion had to seem real. It had to be convincing. Every cry for help was meant to paint the picture of a woman cornered, violated. She could already picture the shock on their faces, the sympathy in their eyes, and the disgust that would surely fall on Jordan. It didn't take long. The door burst open, and several of her colleagues rushed in. There were gasps, muffled exclamations of disbelief. Sarah's tears were flowing freely now, though they were more staged than genuine. She pointed a trembling finger at Jordan, who had stood up, confusion written all over his face, his brow furrowed with bewilderment. "Get away from her," one of the women shouted, her face pale with horror. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The game had begun. Jordan's eyes widened as his mind scrambled to make sense of what was happening. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come. His hands trembled slightly as he stepped back, unsure of what to do next. His entire body felt frozen in place, like time itself had stopped. "Did he?" one of his colleagues whispered, her voice trembling with shock. Another woman quickly pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed the police. The room erupted into chaos, the office buzzing with panic. The tension in the air was thick, like a storm about to break. Sarah's acting had done its job. Her accusations had already begun to spread. Within minutes, the sound of boots clattering in the hallway signaled the arrival of the police. 2 officers stepped into the office, their eyes scanning the scene. Sarah was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her torn blouse, her tears flowing freely. Jordan stood there, still frozen, staring at the floor, his face pale and twisted in confusion. What was happening? How had this spiraled so out of control? The officers exchanged a brief glance, their expressions unreadable, before one stepped forward with cold authority. "Sir, we need you to come with us." "What's going on?" Jordan stammered, his voice barely a whisper. His heart pounded in his chest, his throat tightening. The words didn't make sense. This couldn't be happening. But the officers didn't answer him. Instead, they motioned for him to turn around, slipping handcuffs around his wrists. The sharp click of the cuffs echoed through the room, like the final nail in his coffin. Jordan's mind raced, his entire body tense with fear. He hadn't done anything. He couldn't understand how it had gotten to this point, but no one seemed to be listening to him. Sarah's accusations were enough. The office had already made its decision. As the officers led Jordan out of the office, Sarah's eyes followed him. There was a strange, almost satisfied look on her face, but underneath it, Jordan could sense something darker. Guilt? No. She had done what she needed to do. He would pay for what he'd taken from her. She watched him, her grip tightening on her torn blouse as he was escorted down the hallway. The gleam of the handcuffs under the fluorescent lights felt almost like a symbol of justice to her. Jordan sat in the cold, sterile holding cell, his mind a haze of confusion and terror. The cuffs dug into his wrists, a constant reminder of the nightmare that had suddenly taken over his life. How had this happened? One moment he was just doing his job, the next he was accused of something unimaginable. It didn't make sense. The disbelief, the fear, it all consumed him. How could anyone believe this about him? The police had questioned him, but his words felt trapped, unable to escape. How could he explain what had happened in Sarah's office? He couldn't even comprehend it himself. She had walked in so calmly, and then chaos, screams, her accusations. Nothing made sense. When Jordan was finally released on bail, the weight of it all felt suffocating. The charges had been made official. Attempted rape. His life was falling apart, unraveling before his eyes. Every call from family, every conversation with his lawyer, felt like part of a terrible dream. There was no concrete evidence to prove his innocence, no witnesses, no proof of what had really happened. Sarah had carefully crafted her story, and the office had taken her side. She was the victim. And Jordan? He was the monster. His lawyer, Claire, a seasoned defense attorney, was doing everything she could. They had combed through the evidence, but there was nothing. No physical evidence to back up his side of the story. No witnesses. All they had were Jordan's word against Sarah's. His alibi didn't help. There was no CCTV footage in his office to prove what had really happened. All the legal documents, all the forms, felt like they were closing in on him. How could he fight a case where his only defense was that he hadn't done it? How could he prove his innocence when the system was already so quick to assume guilt? In court, the tension in the air was suffocating. Sarah took the stand, and the room seemed to hold its breath. She was the picture of a distraught victim. Her eyes were wide with fear, her voice trembling as she spoke. She recounted the events with chilling detail, painting Jordan as a predator who had cornered her, his intentions monstrous. Her performance was flawless. Every word, every gesture perfectly executed. She described how he had supposedly tried to assault her, how she had fought him off with all her strength. The courtroom murmured in disbelief as she spun her tale, her emotions raw, her face streaked with tears. The defense tried to poke holes in her story, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The jury was already leaning toward conviction. Jordan's heart hammered in his chest as the judge prepared to deliver his verdict. There was little hope left. The case had been so carefully constructed, every piece of evidence stacked against him. The fear of being sent to prison for 25 years suffocated him, pressing down harder with every passing second. It was hard to breathe, let alone think that his life would never be the same again. The clock ticked down to the final moments of the trial, and Jordan braced himself for the worst. Just as the judge raised his gavel, signaling the end of the trial and, likely, Jordan's fate, a sudden disruption shattered the tense silence. The courtroom doors flew open, and a figure rushed in, causing a ripple of surprise and confusion throughout the room. The figure, a man in an inconspicuous suit, hurried toward the defense table. His urgency was palpable as he handed over a small, unmarked parcel to Claire. There was no explanation. Only a brief glance exchanged between the mysterious man and Claire. Without missing a beat, Claire turned to the judge. Her voice was steady but filled with intent, as she requested permission to present new evidence that could change the entire course of the trial. The judge, momentarily taken aback by the interruption, nodded reluctantly, allowing her to proceed. Claire wasted no time. She inserted a flash drive into the court's evidence system. Within seconds, the courtroom screen flickered to life. Footage. Clear, unambiguous footage from the CCTV cameras installed in Jordan's office. Footage that had somehow been overlooked until now. The video played. It captured every single moment of Sarah's meticulously orchestrated act. The footage showed her entering Jordan's office with calm deliberation. It followed her as she tore at her blouse, preparing to scream, making sure her false narrative of assault was set in motion. Every step, every move was caught on tape. The truth was there, laid bare for everyone to see. As the truth unfolded before the courtroom, the reaction was immediate. Gasps of disbelief filled the air. The jury's collective shock was palpable. The evidence had been so carefully concealed, so expertly manipulated, yet here it was, laid bare for everyone to see. Sarah, the supposed victim, had been the mastermind behind it all. The tension in the room shifted to utter disbelief as the courtroom absorbed the revelation that the entire case had been a calculated lie. The silence was thick, broken only by the sound of the judge's voice cutting through the stunned atmosphere. His gavel struck the desk with a resounding echo. "In light of this new evidence," he declared, his voice firm but steady, "the charges against the defendant, Mr. Jordan Williams, are hereby dropped. He is exonerated." For a moment, Jordan's legs almost gave way beneath him, but somehow he remained standing, the air knocked from his lungs. It didn't feel real. It was like waking from a nightmare, only to find yourself still in the midst of it. The weight of the accusation, the suffocating fear, it all seemed to melt away, leaving him numb, his mind still trying to process what had just happened. The judge turned to face the defense, his voice now carrying the full authority of the court. "As for Miss Sarah Thompson," he continued, "her actions were deliberate, malicious, and aimed at framing an innocent man. I am ordering her immediate arrest." The shock on Sarah's face was unmistakable. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She tried to take a step forward, but the officers swiftly moved to restrain her. As they led her out of the courtroom in handcuffs, a murmur of disbelief swept through the room. The judgment was clear. Jordan walked out of the courtroom, his steps slow but purposeful. His heart still raced, but there was a sense of weight lifting from his shoulders. The ordeal was finally over. He was free. But the scars, the emotional wounds, would remain unseen. The following week, when Jordan returned to work, he was met with an unexpected gesture. His boss, a stern but fair man, approached him in the break room. "Jordan," he said with a rare smile, "I've been impressed by your strength and resilience through all this. You've shown more character than most in this office. I'm offering you another promotion, one that you truly deserve." The words hit Jordan like a wave, the recognition, the validation he so desperately needed. He nodded, his eyes finally clearing, a sense of peace slowly settling inside him. As he left the office later that day, he couldn't help but feel a quiet resolution. Justice had been served. The false accusations had been exposed, and though the scars would linger, Jordan had reclaimed his life, his career, and his dignity.